3 out of every 4 tornadoes on Earth hit one country. The United States, about 1,200 a year. And for the last 40 to 50 years, the place inside it where they strike most has been moving, sliding off the Great Plains and into the Mid-South. The problem is that the ground it is moving onto is where tornadoes kill the most people. By the end of this, you will know exactly where TornadoAlley is shifting, why it is moving, and why that shift is making these storms far more deadly. The United States records about 1,200 tornadoes in an average year, and that is roughly 75% of every tornado known to happen anywhere on the planet. 3 out of every 4. No other country comes close. And for as long as anyone has been keeping track, those storms have concentrated in one place: the Great Plains, the open run of flat land through Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas that we all learned to call Tornado Alley. Here is the news: that alley is moving. The center of America's tornado activity is sliding east, off the plains and into the Mid-South, and it is happening right now, measured over the last 40 to 50 years. This is not a forecast, and it is not a theory. It is a documented trend in the data. The storms are not disappearing from the country. They are relocating to a different part of it. And the part they are moving toward is the dangerous part. That is the whole reason this matters. The places gaining tornado risk are the places where tornadoes kill the most people. So the headline is not that America is getting more tornadoes. The headline is that the same tornadoes are migrating onto ground that turns them into something far deadlier. Let me show you exactly how we know the alley is moving, where it is going, and why that shift is so much more dangerous than the raw numbers suggest. The person who first put hard numbers on this is an atmospheric scientist named Victor Gensini, and the way he figured it out is worth your attention, because it did not start in a laboratory. It started in the field. Gensini spent years chasing storms across the Great Plains, the way thousands of storm chasers do, driving out every season to find the supercells that drop the funnels. And season after season, he kept running into the same problem. The tornadoes were not there. He was standing in the place that every textbook calls the highest frequency tornado location on Earth, and the sky kept staying quiet. One slow year means nothing. But after enough of them piled up, he started asking a different question. What if the plains are not the tornado capital they used to be? What if the map everyone trusts is out of date? So he went back and ran the numbers. He plotted the long-term tornado trend not just for the country as a whole, but for individual cities, watching how the risk at each spot had changed across the decades. And the pattern was clear. Across the Great Plains, the trend lines pointed down. The most famous tornado region in the world had been getting quieter for half a century. In his words, this is definitely a trend, and it is real. That is the finding that reset the map, and the next number is the one that makes it impossible to ignore. The key fact is this: while tornado frequency was falling across much of the plains, the national total was not falling. The country kept catching its 1,200 or so tornadoes a year, kept catching most of the world's total year after year. So the math leaves only one explanation. If the storms are leaving the plains and the national count is holding steady, they have to be showing up somewhere else. They are. The trend that points down over Kansas and Oklahoma points up across the Mid-South and the Southeast. Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia. More tornadoes and more of the strong, violent ones, the kind that do the killing. The risk is draining out of the Western Alley and pooling in the east. The activity did not vanish, it relocated. To be clear about the scale of this, we are talking about a measurable change in one of the most violent forces in nature over a span of decades. The risk at specific cities in the Mid-South has climbed steadily, year after year, while the risk at cities in the Western Plains has dropped. It is not a single dramatic jump. It is a slow migration that only becomes obvious when you line up the decades and watch the center of activity walk east across the map. And that quiet quality is part of what makes it dangerous, because a threat that moves this gradually is one almost no one notices until it arrives on their doorstep. Now, one important clarification, because this gets twisted easily: this does not mean the Great Plains are suddenly safe. Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas are still the single most tornado-prone ground in the country. The plains are still the hot spot. What changed is the direction of travel. The data show a real decline in parts of the traditional alley and a real rise farther east. The hotspot is still a hotspot, but it is no longer the only one, and the new one is growing. And the new one sits in exactly the wrong place, which brings us to the part that should concern you most. Picture 2 maps of the United States. On the first one, you shade in where tornadoes happen most often. That map is easy because everyone knows it. The brightest colors sit over the southern plains. That is the frequency map, and the plains still win it. Now the second map. On this one, you shade in where tornadoes kill. Not where they form, but where the deaths happen. And the colors are not the same. The deadliest ground is farther east and south, over Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas, a region informally called Dixie Alley. The place with the most tornadoes and the place with the most tornado deaths are two different places. And the entire shift we are talking about is carrying the storms off the first map and onto the second. That is the core of this story. America's tornado activity is sliding from the region where tornadoes are most survivable toward the region where they kill the most. The plains, for all their violence, are relatively forgiving. Open land, daytime storms, slow movement, sparse population. The east is the opposite on nearly every count. And those differences are not random. Each one pushes the death toll the same direction. They stack on top of each other. Scientists put it bluntly. In the gaining regions, the deck is stacked against the people living there. Let me walk you through why, one factor at a time, starting with speed. In the classic image of TornadoAlley, a storm chaser stands calmly in a field, filming a tornado as it grinds slowly across the horizon. That image is real, and it exists for a reason. Plains tornadoes can move astonishingly slowly, sometimes around 5 miles per hour, slow enough to watch, slow enough to walk away from. That slowness is a gift. It is time, and time is the single most valuable thing a person can have when a tornado is near. The eastern storms take that gift away. In the Mid-South and the Southeast, tornadoes frequently arrive, moving 60 to 70 miles per hour. That is not a storm you stroll away from. That is a tornado moving at highway speed, covering a mile a minute, crossing from the edge of your awareness to your front door before you have finished deciding whether to be worried. The warning that buys a Plains family 15 minutes might buy a family in the Southeast only 2 or 3. And a couple of minutes is often not enough to wake up, understand the threat, gather a family, and get to safety. This is the first reason the moving alley is so dangerous, and it makes everything else worse. A faster storm gives you less time to overcome every other disadvantage the region has. And because the eastern storms tend to come bundled into fast-moving lines fed by Gulf moisture, the speed is not the exception. It is the norm. The alley is not just moving east. It is moving towards storms built to give you the least possible warning. And the next factor takes away even the warning your own eyes could give you. There is a number in tornado science you should know. A tornado that strikes at night is roughly twice as deadly as the same tornado in daylight. Twice from nothing but the absence of light. During the day, a tornado is something you can see coming, a dark column on the horizon you can react to even if you missed the warning. At night, that backup is gone. A nighttime tornado is effectively invisible until it is tearing at the walls around you. And it arrives when people are asleep and least able to act. So why does the eastern alley have so many more nighttime tornadoes? The answer is the Gulf of Mexico. Out on the plains, a lot of tornado activity follows the sun. The ground heats through the afternoon. The storms fire in the late day, and as the sun goes down, the engine winds down. But the southeast sits right next to that warm Gulf, and the Gulf keeps feeding warm, moist air into the region around the clock. The storms do not need the afternoon sun, so they keep going after dark. People go to sleep, the storm keeps running, and at 2 in the morning, the tornado arrives, moving 70 miles an hour in total darkness. Put the two together, and you see the shape of the danger the moving alley creates. A storm that gives only a couple of minutes of warning, arriving at the 1 hour when you're unconscious and cannot use your own eyes. The darkness also defeats the warning systems, because a siren or a phone alert only works if it can wake a sleeping person in time, and many of those systems were never built to do that. This is what it means for the activity to relocate onto deadlier ground. The ground is deadlier in a specific mechanical way, and no single event shows it more clearly than what happened one December night in a small town in Kentucky. Heather Chambers lives in Wingo, Kentucky, a place the old tornado map would have called safe. It is not in the plains. It is not where the chasers go. But it sits squarely in the eastern zone where the risk has been climbing, and on the night of December 10th, 2021, the moving alley came to collect. She did not expect it. The evening was warm and calm, no rain, nothing that felt like danger. She drove home like any normal night, turned on the television to check the weather, and fell asleep. What woke her was the house itself. She later described it as the house feeling like it was moving, almost like taking a deep breath and letting it out. She sat up, heard glass breaking, and before she could even stand, she was sucked through the window. There was no time to see it coming and no time to get to a safe room. She landed a few hundred feet from her house and was found by a neighbor under piles of debris in darkness so complete she could barely be seen. She survived, and her experience is a checklist of everything the moving alley does. A warm December night, proof the eastern storms have lost the spring-only season. A 2 in the morning strike in the dark, proof of the nighttime danger fed by the Gulf. A speed that gave her no time to stand. A Kentucky town nowhere near the old alley. and she was one survivor in the deadliest December tornado event on record, an outbreak that produced at least 66 tornadoes across the Midwest and the Ohio Valley over December 10th and 11th. In her area, some neighbors survived only because they climbed into precast concrete septic tanks. The houses around them were destroyed while the tanks held. That is the shifted alley in one night, and now let me explain why it is moving in the first place. To understand why the storms are leaving the western plains, you need one piece of the atmosphere most people have never heard of. Meteorologists call it the cap. The cap is a layer of hot, dry air that parks a few thousand feet up, right on top of the warm, humid air near the ground. And it suppresses storms. It acts like a lid on a pot. The warm air below wants to rise, but every time it tries, it hits that lid and gets stopped. And like a lid on a pot, the cap is more dangerous than it sounds. When you put a lid on a pot on the stove, the energy does not escape. It builds. Under a strong cap, the warm, moist air keeps gathering energy all day with nowhere to go, until an updraft finally punches through. When it does, the release is explosive. And that is what produces the most violent supercells and the worst tornadoes. So the cap decides the difference between a sky that does nothing and a sky that detonates. Here is why that matters for the map. The strength of that lid is not the same everywhere, and it is not staying the same over time. The cap is the hinge of the entire shift. Where the lid is getting stronger, storms get shut down and the tornado trend falls. Where the fuel underneath is getting stronger faster, storms punch through more often, and the trend climbs. That is exactly what is happening across the country right now, and the two forces driving it are a drying southwest on one side and a warming Gulf on the other. Start in the west. The American Southwest, the source of that hot, dry capping air, is getting hotter and drier. As it bakes, the air it sends east gets hotter and drier too, which means the lid it lays down over the western plains, over places like West Texas, gets stronger. A stronger lid means fewer storms can ever break through it. The fuel is still there, the instability is still there, but the cap wins more often, and so the tornado trend across the western alley bends down. The West is not losing tornadoes because the fuel ran out. It is losing them because the lid got harder to break. Now go south to the Gulf of Mexico, the gas tank for severe weather in the eastern United States. The Gulf is getting warmer, and a warmer Gulf pumps more water vapor into the air that rides north over the mid-south. That air carries more moisture and more raw energy than it used to. So while the lid in the west is getting stronger, the fuel in the east is getting stronger faster. And every time a column of that supercharged air punches through the cap, you get the same explosive storms, except now they are forming over Tennessee and Kentucky instead of Kansas. That is the engine of the whole shift in one sentence. The lid is winning in the west, and the fuel is winning in the east. So the storms and the danger slide toward the Gulf. These forces are not about to reverse. A southwest that keeps drying keeps strengthening the lid, and a Gulf that keeps warming keeps strengthening the fuel. The eastward pressure on TornadoAlley is not a one-time event. It is a push that keeps pushing. But before you take all of this as settled, there is a fair question to deal with first. The skeptical question is a good one, and it deserves a straight answer. Tornado records are messy. Over the last several decades, we built a national radar network, trained armies of storm spotters, and put a camera in nearly every pocket and a dash cam in millions of cars. So, of course, we report more tornadoes now than we used to. More eyes, more reports. If the eastward trend were built only on raw tornado counts, you would be right to doubt it because we might just be getting better at seeing storms that were always there. Here is why the finding holds. The shift is not argued from raw counts alone. Researchers go underneath the counts to the atmosphere itself and measure the environments that produce tornadoes, the moisture, the instability, the wind shear, independent of whether anyone reported a funnel. And when you look at the environments instead of the reports, the same picture appears. The conditions that breed strong tornadoes are becoming less common over the western plains and more common over the mid-south. The shift shows up in the physics, not just the headlines. That is why scientists are willing to call it real. I will be equally honest about the edges. There is genuine scientific debate about how much of this to pin on human-caused climate change versus the natural decade-to-decade swings tornado activity has always had. The relocation is observed and solid. The cap mechanism, the drying west and the warming Gulf, is the leading explanation. The precise attribution is still being worked out. But you do not need to resolve that debate to be in the path. The storm does not care why it formed over Kentucky instead of Kansas. It only matters that it did. Whenever the sky does something hard to explain, a second story shows up beside the real one, and it deserves a direct answer. There's a claim circulating online that tornadoes are being deliberately steered or engineered, often pointing at atmospheric research installations. The data do not support it, and the reason is energy. The amount of energy in even a single significant tornado dwarfs anything human beings can produce with a transmitter by many orders of magnitude. There is no mechanism by which a ground-based facility could create, aim, or relocate a continent-scale pattern of tornado activity. People sometimes point to cloud seeding as proof we can control the weather. Cloud seeding is real, but it only nudges a little extra precipitation out of clouds that already exist. It cannot build a supercell, and it certainly cannot pick up the center of American tornado activity and walk it hundreds of miles east over 50 years. The truth is actually more unsettling than the conspiracy, not less. If a machine were steering the storms, someone would be in control. There is no one in control. The alley is moving because of slow planetary forces, with no operator and no off switch, which is exactly what makes it hard to stop. So when you set the alternative aside, what is left standing is the unglamorous, well-supported answer. The alley is moving, no one is steering it, and the cause is a changing climate, rearranging where the heat and moisture sit. That leaves one question that actually matters to you, the person living under this sky, and it is the practical one. Here's the bottom line. The United States did not get more tornadoes. It got the same tornadoes in worse places. The country still catches its 1,200 a year and still catches most of the world's total. What changed is the address, and the address moved from the best possible ground to the worst, off the open daytime, springtime plains, and onto the fast, dark, year-round, hidden, crowded ground of the Mid-South. The violence did not increase. It relocated onto ground that converts it into death. And here is the good news. Because the deck being stacked does not mean the game is lost. Even strong tornadoes are very unlikely to kill you if you take a few basic steps. Do not be in a vehicle. If a tornado is coming, and you are in a car, you are in one of the most dangerous places possible. Get into a real building, get to the lowest floor, and get to a small interior room with as many walls between you and the outside as possible, away from windows. That is the entire formula, and it is exactly what saved the people who climbed into those concrete tanks in Kentucky. They put strong material between themselves and the wind, and they got low. A purpose-built storm shelter or a reinforced safe room is even better. And in a region where many homes have no basement at all, having one strong, low place chosen in advance is the difference between hoping and knowing. The hardest part is not knowing what to do. It is believing you will ever need to do it. Heather Chambers said that before that night, you could not have gotten her to take a storm seriously, and now she starts preparing a week ahead. That shift from assuming it will not happen to you to having a plan ready before the sky turns is the most important adaptation anyone in the new alley can make, and it costs nothing. So watch this trend, because it is not slowing down. The drying southwest and the warming Gulf keep pushing the storms east season after season. The map has already moved. The only question left is whether the people now standing in the path update the map in their heads before the night it comes to prove it.